This is the Women Your Mother Warned You About podcast, sponsored by Sales Gravy. I'm Gina Tremarco, Master Sales Trainer and Director of Coaching Programs at Sales Gravy. Before we get started with this week's episode, I want you to go and check out Sales Gravy University. Sales Gravy University is the place where sales professionals and sales leaders from across the globe go to learn and upscale. And right now, if you're a brand new user and you've never used Sales Gravy University before, you can get your first course for free by using coupon code FREECOURSE when you go to learn.salesgravy.com. That's coupon code FREECOURSE when you go to learn.salesgravy.com. And hey, I've got several courses there that you can check out. So I hope to see you there. But let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode. Let's go ahead and get started with this episode of the Women Your Mother Warned You About, brought to you by Sales Gravy. I'm Gina Tremarco, Master Sales Trainer at Sales Gravy.
And I'm Susanna Gray-Jones, Master Sales Coach and owner of recruitment company Chime Search.
Ooh, and guess what we're doing today? What are we doing today?
Today, see, I'm in charge now. Am I like, am I taking over?
Wait, I didn't say you were in charge. I just said, what are we doing today? But I mean, if you know what I'm going to do with you, like I do with my husband, which is, by the way, your fault.
Okay.
Remember my bachelorette party?
I do.
Where you asked those questions of me and him, and we kind of got them wrong. One of them was, who said
I love you first? Oh, who's in charge?
Who's in charge and who gets the last word? And I think what we determined, I forget now what the answers were, but what we determined was he gets the last word, but I'm in charge.
Yes, I that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar after all of those vodka jello things that you gave me. I think I'm going to have to come up with something equally fun for Outbound, aren't I? Some equally revealing quiz.
I'm excited about Outbound. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I sent out my proposal to you. Did you get it? Did you get a copy of the proposal?
About what we're doing at Outbound? I did. Yeah. Okay. And I'm very excited.
We can't talk about it yet because I'm waiting for the boss man to approve it. So I'm excited we will be on the main stage at Outbound Live, bringing you this show with some fantastic guests. There'll be a panel of guests during lunchtime, during the lunch hour. So,
oh my gosh, I cannot wait.
Get your tickets at outboundconference.com. Okay, that's enough of my advertising. So it's another, we'll pretend you're in charge. It is another episode of listener questions.
And we have some pretty interesting ones coming up. And something that is really current, that is coming up all the time in sales. And there's a lot to be said about it, and a lot of opinions, a lot of controversy. So we'll be careful what we say.
Wait, what did you say? A lot of
controversy?
Controversy?
Yeah, like controversial controversy.
Oh, is that how you say it?
What do you say?
Controversy?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's just me being blonde. I think it's not an English thing. It's just a Susanna thing.
I was like, is that an English thing? Okay, go on. Continue.
Well, it sounded good. So a question about women in sales. Okay. So as a recruiter, I speak to women and men on a daily basis. And I'm starting to kind of understand the differences a bit more. And it's really interesting. So I'm going to ask you this first. This is something that always comes up. I want to go into sales. I'm a woman. And what would you say to women considering going into sales? What advice would you give to them?
Ooh.
Where does one start?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's like, we could do many episodes about that.
So this is a thing, right? I know you're about to answer, but I was reading something online where it said, picture a B2B leader in your head, like a top leader. Are you doing it? Top of company sales board and born to do it. Are you picturing a man or are you picturing a woman?
Oh, God, I don't even want to admit it.
It's bad.
Well, maybe because I have a male boss that I just went there. I mean, that is an interesting thing in itself. Why would I go there?
Yeah. Why do you think?
I mean, I think in the moment it's because I have a male boss.
Is that why? Because I think I would have thought of a man anyway, but that's not because of how I feel about it. It's just that Wolf of Wall Street, stereotypical suited and booted. If you go out in London to the bankingville of the city, you're more likely to see a man. If you're a woman and you want to pull a guy, you're more likely to find one in the city. I hate to say it.
Yeah.
Am I just going to get in trouble for saying that? But let's talk about facts here. Women make up half of the college-educated workforce, yet they're still severely underrepresented. So there was a 2019 study that found that on average, women in sales outperformed their male counterparts when it comes to making quota, with 86% of women making quota compared to 78% of men. Yet women only make 28% of sales managers. So what's with that? What's up?
What do you think?
So I'm going to be very unpopular if I tell you what I think. And
go ahead.
You might lose some listeners here. But what I think about this is, and this is just my personal experience, I come across women every day in offices, some dominated by men, some more equal, where women are afraid to speak up, like in a big way. So I meet two types of women. I meet the types of women who can't speak up because they're not allowed to speak up because they're not in a culture where it's encouraged for women to speak up. So you could blame the men for that and the sort of culture that it adapts. But I also have worked in cultures where women see it as because they're a woman, they can't speak up. It's their perception of being a woman opposed to the environment around them. And I think there is a danger in this world that when we feel insecure about something, that we become victims. Like, it's very easy. Like when I was a kid, if people were mean to me, my dad, loving as he was, he would tell me that they were jealous of me. You're beautiful. They're jealous of you. And I believed it when I was little because it was easier to fall victim to why people weren't being nice to me than to maybe think that maybe I had done something wrong and to be accountable for it. And I think there is a problem there slightly.
That's an interesting perspective, because I think, although I will say later in my career, I had often heard they're jealous of you, that phrase of why some people react the way they do to my personality. I kind of wish I would have heard that when I was younger. Because I think it would have boosted my confidence. I'm a big believer in hearing how do I put this? Like, part of me doesn't really care what you think, right? Because I'm going to be who I am. But I think there is some value in taking inventory. You've heard me give this kind of quiz all the time. What are the 3 words that people would associate to you when they think of you? I think there's some value in playing to how people do see you and then playing to the strengths of that, right? The positive words, the words that have always come back about me are fun and risk taker and assertive. And I find all of those words positive.
I agree with that.
And so that's how people see me. People also see me as extremely outgoing and bossy. Be careful. And it's always fascinating to me. Someone said this to me recently, that they're like, well, you're always bossy. You like to boss people around. I'm like, really? Because I've never bossed you around. Oh, yeah, I guess.
So where did they get that perception from? Genuinely, where do you think that was?
I think because I speak my mind. And so I think maybe some perception, or like that's their perception, or maybe they're projecting their insecurity onto my confidence. Does that sound? I
think you're very wise, and you've got a natural, we spoke about presence in one of our previous episodes. I think that also, if people were to ask you for feedback, you would give it very honestly. And I think that's the difference. You feel comfortable. You think that people are always comfortable to get feedback because that's your job, right? You're a trainer, you're a coach. So if people want to perceive that as bossy, I guess that's just their perception.
but sometimes their perception is their problem, right? Like I can't control their emotions and their insecurity and their whatever. It's just, like I have a hard enough time controlling my own, right? So I can't worry about theirs, so to speak. But at the end of the day, people don't realize how extremely sensitive I am, how bossy
You're soft and fluffy, really. We know.
Well, I am soft and fluffy on the inside for sure, but I'm that person that I don't want to necessarily be in the spotlight as much as I want to be the supporting. I want to be the supporter. I want to be the person that like puts you in the spotlight, but doesn't need to take credit for it. And I don't think people see that.
So I think that the listeners of this show will probably know which one they fit into, but I'm a big fan of the Lifo orientations and the types of management styles that people have, all being good. And if I was to ask you what yours is, I've never asked you what yours is. You've got controlling, you've got adapting, you've got conserving, and you've got supporting. All of them good. But when you are stressed, let's say, for example, I'm very adapting, but when I'm stressed, that can become controlling. And that's the strength, weakness paradox. And it's the negative side of that strength, weakness paradox. Whereas controlling can also be good. It can be a bad thing too. So
what are they again? Controlling, adapting?
Yeah. Controlling, adapting. Often you see in salespeople, conserving and supporting.
When I'm stressed.
So you've got a natural default and then you've got a stressed default.
Natural default. And okay, my natural default I know is supporting. My stress default, I go back and forth between controlling and adapting.
Yeah. And the thing is with Lifo is that, for example, I'm not agreeing with you, by the way, I'm just saying you know yourself better than anyone else. So say, for example, if my strength weakness paradox, I'm going to do a Lifo model on you. So let's say, for example, my default is adapting. And then when I'm stressed, I become uber supporting. When I'm stressed, my style might perceive your controlling style in the wrong way. And I might see you as bossy. So it's not necessarily that you are those things. It's just people's different strength weakness paradox. It's one of the most interesting tools that I have ever come across.
What is it called? I've never heard of this.
It's called Lifo orientations. And it basically tells you what your style is. It's similar to different types of models that we've spoken about, but it will tell you how that person who is of that style will perceive you when they are stressed and when they're in default, which I think
how do you spell that? Lifo?
Lifo. I'll send you stuff on it. It's really fascinating.
Fascinated by that.
Yeah, it's.
I know we kind of got on a tangent away from the original question of the advice for a woman wanting to get into sales. This is quite a juicy topic. Maybe we need to talk about it at Outbound, but
there's a lot to say on it.
And I would want a man to chime in on it as well. So my edit, like if I were to give a 30,000 foot view, I've had some really great male mentors and female mentors. I think you need both. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, and some women might not want to hear this. Sorry. I think for me, it is about, let's go back to the piece where you said, what do you see in your mind, a man or a woman as the leader? I think that you have to approach it. Oh God, I struggle to say it. What do men do, right? Like there is definitely a difference between men and women in general, obviously in personality style. See, I can't even spit the words out. And this is a great example, right? This is a great example. Men would just black and white it, go straight in, go for the deal. Yes, no. Don't tell me how to build a watch. Tell me what time it is. And we women will dance around it. And I think that skill right there to be able to just go straight for it and move on is sometimes a struggle for women in sales.
Yeah. I think there's no shame in saying that. And I don't think you're beating up women by saying that because, again, strength, weakness paradox, when they say at school that girls are better at the coursework, I know I've said this before, and boys are better at exams, there is actual evidence for that belief. And there's also scientific evidence based on the ways that the brains are formed, more that we haven't got the same brains as men. Our brains don't work in the same way as men. And people often think just because a guy's got a dick and a woman's got boobs, that makes us different. But it's actually the brains. And it's like, it's a massive thing. But I mean, in recruitment, one thing that I really, really do notice is that women are often more nervous about their abilities and more conservative about what they're able to do than the men. I feel that if I'm to ask a female recruiter or salesperson for their profile, they'll be much more modest. Whereas a guy will really get straight to the point and like maybe sometimes a bit over the top. And I find that really interesting. And I wonder why that is.
I think some of it, I think it's a combination of, if we go back and talk about nurture versus nature, right? Like not even in the sales arena, but nurture versus nature. I think part of it is partially the way you're raised, right? So when I look at my environment of how I was raised by, a man who could have been my grandfather age-wise, who, didn't finish grade school, who maybe did some illegal things for the mob, who made me work in a flea market as a kid, who's very street smart. He's a person who taught me how to sell. And the running joke always was that I was the son my father should have had. That was like kind of the things his friends would say after he passed away. So I think I was raised very much in his style, right? And so he's kind of a man, rough around the edges, storyteller, funny as can be, huge heart. But we get to the point. I think there's that. And also playing on environment, then it depends on the work culture that you're in. If you're in a work culture that patronizes women or doesn't treat them the same as men, and now you're a woman who, going back to what you were talking about with Lifo, like if you were a woman who grew up being told, don't speak till you're spoken to, don't be aggressive, be demure, and you grow up that way, and then you go into a work culture that is similar, like a good old boys club, that's only going to make it worse. Because how do you grow from that? How do you speak up? It's probably not going to happen. But if you're in a culture where they cultivate women succeeding and women having voices, or you're in a culture where women are in charge. Now, that doesn't always work either, because there are some women who get super insecure and then they will push the other women down. That's a whole nother topic.
They will play to the stereotype.
They will play to that stereotype. So I think there are all those things at play.
Yeah.
And then and all the biases that come along with it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I feel that I know we're here to talk about sales, but I feel like it is a bigger thing. And I see it in so many aspects of gender. When it comes to women who sleep around, they're called schlags, sluts.
Schlags.
And men
Don't
are
be
like
a schlag.
Yeah, and a man is a stud if he does it.
Stud, yeah.
And also just, you watch all these old things like, you've had a boy, he will be our next king. It comes back to the kind of age of, she's given birth to a boy. What's he going to do? Oh, a girl. Okay. That kind of perception that we probably got in our DNA and our evolutionary brains. But I think look
at your own monarchy world. I mean, I became obsessed with Mary, Queen of Scots, and then like all the history behind the queens. And oh my goodness,
I was just thinking of her. But I think I think there's that thing of when when you're with your family, like when you left home and you'd go back and be with your family in that kind of scenario, people always go back to being exactly how they were. It's like their comfort zone. So like when I'm with my sister, I sometimes talk in a baby voice, and I'm with my parents. It's like, I'm a 36-year-old woman. What on earth am I doing? But like we kind of go back into our comfort zone. And I wonder if, it's just exactly what you're saying. If we were nurtured in that way, if we go into environments where it's like that, we fit back into that box instead of bursting out and recognizing that actually, hey, I'm a woman. I've got something to say. I'm going to speak up for myself, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And we are still, I think, only a couple of generations away from when that wasn't okay for a woman to speak up. And you would stay at home, you would do the washing, you would do the meal, and man would come home. It's not, we know people who that is normal for. We both know people who that is normal for. So we can't be surprised that women do have to stand up for themselves. So for that listener's question, what my advice would be to have the confidence to speak up. And even if the other women aren't speaking up, be that woman who leads the other women and says that it's okay for you to not raise your voice, but speak your ideas.
Speak your voice.
Exactly. In meetings, I would love to see more women speak up. I don't see it very much in big teams. Certainly when I was growing up in my 20s, it would often be the men having the confidence to do that. But I do think it's different in every place.
And I do. And again, it depends on what walk of life everybody comes from. Now, I don't hide the fact that I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and I have to work really hard sometimes to not let my emotions take over. On the positive side of that, one of our coworkers, Keith, said, sometimes that also works to your advantage, because my emotions are about deep caring. And so, right. So they're coming from a good place, but how do we get control of that? But sometimes in a work environment, depending on what everyone's walk of life, that emotionality can be construed as, or misconstrued as, a bad thing, right? Like I had a boss who said, now this is back in my day when I used to go in and take over businesses and turn them around. And I was in a turnaround situation, and it was highly intense in a geography that was new to me, and it was hard, and it was different than anything I'd ever dealt with. And I can't even go into it, but because it's too much. But my CEO that I reported directly to said, you're just way too emotional about this. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. This is really intense things. And I am asking you, I'm raising my hand and asking for help. And I'm asking you to send reinforcements, because I cannot do this situation by myself. Right. Like I spoke up about it, and then I still got chastised on it. Right. So, and I have a strong voice and personality that not a lot of people have. So if you stand up and then someone still pushes you back down, chances are you're going to just acquiesce.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
And then we're just conditioning the culture to continue to be that way. So I think, again, coming from the dad that I came from, if I were actually a man with this personality, I probably wouldn't get some pushback I might get once in a while, if that makes any sense.
I've got a question for you. How many times when you were just sort of growing up in sales, or just even in male conversations, like just going out and about, the men would say, oh, is it your time of the month? You're a bit grumpy. Is it your time of the month? To the point, I mean, I slapped my husband because he was always at that time of the month. You've been a bit grumpy. And I don't take that, okay? I don't think it's okay, because it's like making a joke of something that is, I'm sounding like a feminist now, and I don't think I am especially, but I do think that there are some things that are just said in passing that men do take too far. Or like, oh, she's on one.
I think, quite honestly, I think when men do that, they're just being stupid, and no offense, guys, but I don't think they think. I've had men say to me, we're just stupid. We're dumb guys. Like, I don't think they're even thinking about it. It's something they've been conditioned to say.
Is that mocking? That's the one thing I'm realizing as we're having this conversation that I must be more of a feminist. And I thought I was, because it's that what really gets on my nerves is that mocking of you little woman. And when we went to, we were actually once went to Abu Dhabi for a New Year's party. and there were some men there. And I think it's just a different culture in some places in the world where, and I remember I was being outspoken about something and the guy was just laughing, look at her. And like, well, he might as well pat me on the head, and I got it grated on me so much. And I said, excuse me, I think I must have had an argument with him or something. I might have had a lot to drink. I can't remember. But, is that kind of like, oh, you little woman with your little opinion, aren't you cute? And it's like, I know we talk about, how cuteness can be presence, but it's when cuteness becomes patronizing, that bothers me. That bothers me a lot.
Well, again, it goes back to upbringing, right? You could relate it to anything if you think about how people are related. Like you just said, going back to when you go back home, you kind of revert back to who you were. If I think about how I grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in, right? There is a certain attitude, behavior, even for those who went to college in my neighborhood, there's still just kind of a small way of thinking. Or I look at this people who are considered racist, and I'm not saying there aren't racist, but I'm saying I think racism comes from ignorance. I think discriminating against women often comes from ignorance. I think when you're raised in a society that does not support or promote women, or you're raised in a society that sees color, or is racist. I don't know how to say that the right way. Yeah. If you're raised in that and you don't know any better and nobody teaches you any better, then the behavior continues. I'm not trying to make an excuse for it. I think that's just a reality.
And it is. I mean, you're talking very much about the social constructions of it, right? And how we're raised. And the thing that I always find gets me, though, is let's talk about sex for a second.
Let's talk about sex, baby.
Casual sex.
Let's talk about you and me. Go on. Slag.
Singing. But like, for example, a woman who sleeps around is a slag. We've spoken about that. But also, and I see this a lot, I'm at that age now where friends are getting divorced and men are having I've seen a few female friends.
So you got a lot of slag friends.
No, I see a few female friends who are having affairs with married men. And at the beginning of it, they often say, no, it's fine. My emotions are not involved. It's fine. It's just sex. It's okay. But it never is. And they always get emotionally attached. But it's the same when I was in my 20s, and I was never a schlag. I would make them wait until the ring wasn't there. But some girls would.
I thought you were still a virgin.
Shh, don't tell anyone. But like there were some women, they would literally just sleep around like no tomorrow. I'm coming back to sales in a minute. And they would say that they were fine with it. They were not attached. And the guys were seen to be able to do it, but the women were unable to do it. They would find it hurtful in the end. And they would get emotional about it. I would always see that pattern. If the girl gets hurt, the guy carries on. So guy, they say, is biologically constructed to sleep around and bear their seed, if you like, in the evolutionary brain. And women, it's like their lifelong partner in their brain when they have sex with someone. Now, could we relate that to sales as well, in the sense that women might get more emotional if they are rejected, or the amygdala might just be a bit more sensitive. The emotional side of our brain comes into play more, and the men don't recognize that because it's not something that they can empathize with because of how they are constructed differently, and therefore understanding is lacking. So it's not so much that women are pushed out, it's just they don't understand. So they're thought of as emotional and weaker, and could be argued to make us stronger.
No, I think our emotions make us more as kind of like what Keith and I talked about today. I think emotions definitely play to our favor when it comes to empathy and building relationships. And I think that's why women are so great at sales. And some of those stats that you shared, I would be, now the more we talk about this, I would be curious to have some of those stats broken down. What percentage of those women are hunters versus farmers? Do you know where I'm going with this?
I do. Let's not put them all in one box based on their gender. Let's talk about their sales style as well.
Yeah. So, being a hunter is a little more aggressive and definitely requires more persistence and tenacity
Mm-hmm.
and obstacle immunity, whereas a farmer is about relationship and watering the seeds that you planted and continuing to watch over the crops, right? Like when you think about how we're wired, if we want to go back to that in caveman days, right? As the women in the cave, we weren't out killing the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some of them were.
Exactly. Society is catching up, though. The fact we're even having this conversation, like Singapore, did you see the other day? They've only just legalized gay sex or something. It's just that she's like, why should she talk about sex again? No, but the point is that we have come so far in the last 100 years.
I was like, is sex legalized everywhere? I don't know.
Gay sex wasn't in Singapore.
I'm ignorant. I don't even know if it is like in the US. I mean, in every state. I don't know. Somebody, if you're listening, tell me. Somebody tell me.
Can I ask a question about women? Because this comes up quite a lot as well. So women often talk about how the boys' club, they feel like they are sort of segregated because they're a woman. But I've also heard women feel that they're segregated by other women. So I'll give an example here. This is a question. I'm new to my role and I often feel paranoid because I'm in the office full time and I can't get away from office politics. How do I deal with the girls' club? So I'm a new girl. They often whisper when I'm in the office and they often go out to lunch and I'm never invited. I feel left out. What advice can you give me? Now, this is someone I know who said this. And I think we've all felt like this at some point.
Well, there's a couple ways to look at this. Do you want to be invited? Do you want to be invited for the sake of being invited, or do you want to be invited because you really want to hang out with them? And dig even deeper. Do you really want to be invited to be part of a group that didn't think about inviting you? How's that for an answer?
It's a great answer. I do think, though, one thing, having like, I do think leadership does have a responsibility here, though, to create opportunities for everyone to be included, especially if they're new to the company and they're in the office consistently.
I agree.
And my other thing is, and that's the one thing, like giggling on the side of an office and whispering is one of my bugbears. I remember we had a group of, I'm sure guys do it as well, but we had a group of women who did it in my office that I used to work in. And I saw some other managers do it as well. And in the end, I remember just saying, one of our things that we have in this office, we don't want people to feel uncomfortable. We don't want them to feel paranoid. So these are the things that people are saying make them feel like this. So if you need to talk privately, go into a meeting room or, go outside. And it helped. But I think the main thing is leadership really trying to integrate people fully. You are always going to have cliques. It's exactly what you said. Like, there are always going to be people who go out to lunch. I remember one of my first jobs that I had, I was never part of that clique. And if they invited me, I would say no, but I still wanted to be invited. I still wanted the opportunity to say no, not just to be.
That's sort of my point. But I agree with you. If the company is not fostering that culture, right, which really goes back to onboarding. Right? How are you onboarding your employees, and are you creating, right? Leadership should be modeling inclusion of like welcoming the new people. Hey, everybody, Susanna's here. Make her feel at home. Make sure someone invites her out to lunch. Like that should be part of an onboarding process. And then that becomes the expectation for the culture. That's our way of saying, you know what, we include everybody. Do not click it up. Now you're going to have the clicks and you're never, ever going to avoid that. I dealt with that all the time running an improv theater with, performer type people, which are very emotional. And we were a very inclusive culture just by the nature of yes and improv, that we accept everybody. But even in that acceptance culture, I still had clicks, and it would make me crazy because I'd get some complaints about it. And then I just finally realized, you know what, you guys, you are going to have clicks within here because you're going to resonate with some people. Like, for instance, people that onboarded at the same time became their own little clique. Like, it's just natural that they came in together. And so now they've got this bond, and that's okay. But as the leader, I still needed to foster an environment of bringing everybody together to the table so that people mingled. So I think very much leadership has a responsibility to that.
Yeah, I think if somewhere's got bad retention, especially a lot of sales environments, people forget to be welcoming to the new people because they're so used to seeing the revolt. Well, why should I invite that person? They'll probably be gone next week.
There's that too. So that says a lot about the culture, that I've heard those comments before. I don't want to really get close to someone because I don't know if they're going to be around long enough. I heard that about moving to the South in the US. Like when I moved to South Carolina, someone said to me, until you're here for 2 years, most people are not going to accept you, because we're in a transient area where people move here thinking they're going to live the life and then realize it's not the life they wanted and they leave. And so it's very transient. And so people don't want to become too close to you until they know that you're going to be here for a while. So
interesting.
There is some of that. My other advice on that would be, if you want to be invited to lunch, just break the circle and be like, hey, you guys, I would love to join you. Where are you guys going? Which also breaks the circle of ignorance, because maybe they just weren't thinking. Maybe they just weren't, it wasn't on their mind to invite you. And again, let's circle it back to men versus women, right? Like, okay, that's a women's clique, but sometimes men just don't think. And my husband will kill me for this, but I don't think he's listened to episodes for a while. So his coworkers, and they're mostly men, but there's 1 or 2 women, his coworkers, now these are all law enforcement officers. Okay. They have started giving him a hard time and calling him names because his wife makes him lunch. And his wife has broken the routine of them all going out to lunch together.
Oh,
now I'm like, did you defend me and say it was your idea that I make you lunch so that we save money? He's like, of course I did. I'm like, so are you okay with them harassing you? He's like, yeah, we're just guys busting each other's chops. That's what we do. He's like, I don't care. So they don't get the point of the story is that they don't get upset about it.
I do enjoy that. And I must say, I do enjoy that about men. The fact that they can banter like quite close to the bone, and it's funny. And I think that we can learn a lot from them in our style as women. But I think they can also learn a lot from us in the way we are emotionally, like you said earlier, and the way that we recognize and understand emotions.
And I think that's where someone with my personality style struggles, because I have a tendency to have more of that boys will be boys sarcastic style sometimes that I got from my dad. That could be seen as more masculine than feminine. And so then there becomes this kind of like cognitive dissonance where you're like, your brain's having a hard time like understanding that, because a certain HR person who listens to this show once in a while has said to me that, sometimes my sarcasm doesn't come off as well. And so now I've just learned to like preface it, like, especially like in emails, right? Like when you can't read tone. And I'm like, I'll sometimes put in parentheses, just me being sarcastic. Like, I'm not trying to be offensive because I'm thinking my sarcasm is funny, but not everybody thinks it's funny. So you just have to know your audience that you're talking to.
Do you think it's held you back in business at all, being a woman?
Sometimes, yeah. Because I sometimes struggle with being who I am 100%. And then when people don't like that and they push back on it, I will actually repel. Like I will actually kind of go under a rock. I notice that about myself. Like I will run and hide And I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's from, daddy issues where I knew that every time I pleased my dad and I did good, I got praise. And if I didn't do good, I got yelled at. I don't know. I don't know where it comes from.
Do you think that you mentioned that you're worried that sometimes people see you as being emotional because, we have a tendency to be like that. And you said sometimes people can see me as being emotional. Do you think that they see that because we're female? Like, do you think that we're branded emotional when we feel things because we're female?
I think so. I think so because
there is an issue, isn't there? An issue.
I mean, I do think when I think about, I hesitate when I think about all the men I know, I don't see a lot of them showing emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm literally trying to think of like all of my interactions, right? And I see more emotions from women. And so just based on that, I think we're seen that way. I think we're seen as emotional because we're typically more emotional than men on the surface.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the one thing that I would say to these questions is acknowledge it, know it, but don't dwell on it, because sometimes when we do dwell on these things, then it becomes more of an issue than it is, to the point that we get defensive about it. And then it becomes bigger because we're thinking about
then it becomes your reality, right? It's the stories that you tell yourself, then those stories become true. And you and I talked about this on an episode too, about self-talk and how do you turn around things that appear negative and turn them around into positive. Let me take this negative situation and what's the positive in this negative situation? And it's not always easy to do that because when you're in a negative situation, you're stuck there sometimes and it's hard for you to get lifted out of it unless you've got some good people around you who are like, yo, hey, like you. Like when I've had moments and then you remind me, I've got some really great female friends in my life where if I'm having a moment, they'll come back and say, don't forget how amazing you are at what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's good, I think. And that's the one thing I would say. I hope, and I've heard some female thought leaders say, if you're in an environment where women aren't appreciated, just leave. I disagree. I think that if you're a female and you're in an environment where females aren't appreciated that much, then stand up and speak out to it in a positive way. It doesn't always have to be a negative way. And yeah, I feel like if we just run away from it all the time, then you're allowing it. But let's I sound like I'm trying to be some kind of thought leader myself, but like, let's just try and change.
But you are.
But we can change how people think by being.
Well, you're bang on. Like, again, sometimes organizations and cultures don't realize that there's an issue. And unless someone stops and says something, everybody's going to continue to do what they're doing until someone brings it to their attention. I'm working with a client right now that I'm coaching. I'm super excited. And I've been working with her for a year because she keeps renewing her coaching.
Nice.
This last round of coaching, we've been working on her career path at her organization, which is very male dominated. And we've literally created her ideal job, put it on paper, came up with a playbook, came up with a new org chart for the organization, all these things behind the scenes, because we are going to will her into the role. And it's been really cool watching it happen because it's happening.
Yeah.
And like, I get emotional thinking about it because we've literally laid out what this job that does not exist should be. And it really stems from her previous company where she was pushed down and never felt like women had a voice. And now she's in an organization that values women. And I'm like, let's just blow it out of the water. What do you want to do next in this organization? That's how we've been doing on this round of coaching. And, you have to speak up. Now I'm working with another client that, half of their sales team are women and they're high performers and the leader's a man. And he is so gung ho about giving his female leaders every tool, every resource, all the support to feel value as women in sales. And those are the types of organizations that you want to be part of. And if your organization isn't like that, then why not step up and be part of the change? Now I'm sounding like a feminist.
The people who thought they weren't feminists. I mean, I think we probably are feminists. I think the difference is that we're not shouting about it.
Yeah, I'm not radical. And I think probably for both you and I tend to be, believe it or not, more conservative than what most would think. It's a fine line. Like there are a variety of things I think of that should be more equal. But I'm not radical.
Well, we've been here in many senses, haven't we? Gender, the introvert versus extrovert. I think introverts can learn from extroverts, but I also think women can learn from men. And I think that differences, like anything, like any war, people can segregate themselves because of the differences, that we can actually learn from each other and accept each other. We can't change perceptions of individuals who are insecure about the differences. Amen. And amen, sister.
I think this was a really fun episode diving into women in sales. And I don't know, I know we usually call these like listeners' questions, but we're going to theme this somehow: women in sales and the girls club or the boys club or whatever Nian, our producer, comes up with. But before we wrap up, I want to add a new segment to the show. I don't know if do you have one of your end of show questions?
I do.
If you don't,
I do actually.
Okay.
But it's a bit different.
So we can have yours plus a new segment.
Looking forward to it. Because we haven't got a guest here today, I'm not going to do the quiz or truth with you. I'm going to give you an easier one. I'm going to ask you, who is the most inspirational female that you've ever come across? And she can be dead. She can be alive.
Oh my gosh. The most inspirational female. I know this is going to sound very not outside of the box, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. So I'm going to go with my gut, which would be my grandmother. On my mother's side, my German grandmother, who was instrumental. I always used to say if she were alive, she would be the CEO of a company, because she was a force to be reckoned with. She kept her 5 children intact as a family, as while my grandfather was a cobbler for the Nazis. He wasn't a Nazi, but he was forced into working in the army. And my grandmother was left to try to provide for 5 children during horrendous times. And they survived so many different tragedies of almost getting killed until they got out of the country.
Wow.
And made it to America. And it's because of her I'm here. And she was just feisty, and I would have loved to have seen her running a business. So I'm inspired by that kind of grit to do whatever you had to do to take care of your family. Like literally, they were almost killed a number of times. They were kicked out of their home and then put back into a home where other families were being kicked out, and she refused to have other families kicked out of their homes. I don't know. She was a cool ass woman.
Nice. I love that.
What about you?
You're about to ask me another question, but lucky me today. It was probably, I worked for 13 years for a recruitment company, and I worked for someone who slightly did my head in. And I think I probably definitely did her head in as well, but mainly because we were so different. I learned so much from her. She was so fair, like one of those really fair people, really loyal, but super wise. I read lots of books to try and get my wisdom. She just had a natural sense of wisdom. She studied psychology. She was the type of boss who would do anything for any of her workers. Yeah. I mean, we weren't even like besties outside work, but I made her an usherette at my wedding because I felt indebted to her for all the wisdom and knowledge she gave me. And wow, she built me up when many wouldn't have done. So yeah.
That actually, now I was like, I thought of my grandmother first, but there was a woman who mentored me early on at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. And gave me a really big break to let me run PR for the chamber. And then that led to like a variety of other jobs that got me on my career path. But she was my first job interview with her was at lunch. And she's like, all right, what are you drinking? And she's like this older Irish woman. And I was like, I'll have a nice tea. She's like, what? No. What are you drinking? And so she was like, you had to have, she drank Doors on the Rocks with a twist. I'll never forget it. But she had this Rolodex, this City of Chicago Rolodex. Anything you needed, any situation you needed taken care of, she had the contacts.
Nice.
And she knew how to bring people together. And she really did kind of create that in me of all about how do you bring people together just for the sake of bringing people together without wanting anything in return.
Selfless.
Yeah. True. Like a true networker, which is what we need to be in sales. So I think that's another factor of what's helped me in sales of like just naturally bringing people together without expecting anything, without wanting anything.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
New segment. Ask the recruiter. That would be you. You're the recruiter. So for our listeners out there, I do have a question for you from a listener for a recruiter. So this is a salesperson who wants to know they are in a sales role. They've only been with the company for 6 months. And pretty quickly they realized that the company is toxic and not the right place. And it's not just this one salesperson. Both salespeople, the only salespeople in the organization who started around the same time, are now regretting it and they don't know what to do. The leadership is poor. The direction is poor. There are a variety of issues. And so my advice was just leave, get out. And one of them said, my concern is being seen as a job hopper. So I'm just going to stick it out for the year so that it doesn't look like I'm a job hopper. So the question is, should this person stick it out or cut bait and leave now because the ending's not going to be good? And how would a prospective employer look at that salesperson if that salesperson either they have two options, stick it out and still only maybe have 1 year on the job to speak of, or do they get out now and start interviewing and say, I made a bad choice in this position?
Well, I think the first thing before anything else is to remember that career can be a priority, but you should always be the number one priority, your mental health. And it's to ask the people who live with you every day, but also diarize, how am I feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 each day, right? So how much is this affecting me and my potential? Because there are things and situations and environments that can stop us from reaching our potential. That should be the priority, not what does my CV look like? Is it a job hopper CV? Ultimately, the good news is that salespeople are hard to find. People with good attitudes are even harder to find. So if they have both of those things, then ultimately they will have the influencing skills to explain to a new employer without bad-mouthing their previous employee the situations. Now, one thing I always say to people when they're trying to find a new job and they're a bit concerned about how it might look is I say, get evidence. And I mean, praising, like I spoke to someone today and I said, do a screen grab of the emails where you were the top performer on getting those candidates in, because you haven't yet got the figures to prove it, but enough evidence, someone will take a chance on you. But make sure that you look at.
But what if you're in that environment? Because these salespeople were like, every move they make, they are chastised and told they're doing everything wrong.
It's difficult to know without knowing why and what it is that they're supposedly doing wrong. and whether it is something that they need to work on or whether it's actually just a difficult boss. Now, assuming that it is a toxic boss, then you've already answered the question. They need to get out, because ultimately, whatever they do, they're not going to progress in the best possible way.
That's what I said.
Many people, I really truly believe this. And I say this to people who call me up and say they've had a bad day, their boss is horrible, they hate their boss. I always say to them, try and speak to them first, because the amount of times you find them a great job with a great company, and the amount of times that they will then think, oh, they actually really appreciate me and stay because they're really flattered. But they'll end up coming to you anyway 3 months later. But at least give the boss a chance to see if they can put things right. And then if they can't, then you really do make the jump.
Great advice. Yeah. So go try to have that conversation. And it's like any relationship, right? Like any relationship, every relationship needs work.
Yep.
And if you don't have clear communication, sometimes people are just sitting in ignorance. Like they don't know. They don't know that your style's not working. They don't know, all those things. Like,
it's not always weak to jump. Sometimes it's a sign of strength to jump.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the worry that lots of people see it is a weakness to not stay, but it's about putting yourself first.
Yeah. Excellent advice, Susanna Gray Jones.
Thank you very much, Gina and Susanna.
Ask the recruiter. Ask the recruiter. I like this segment. If you've got questions for Susanna on your sales role, I've just created this new segment. That's all we got for this episode. It is time for it's time for you to go to bed. It's time for me to do some more work. And it's time for you listeners to take a break from us. How's that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoyed that, and more to come at Outbound about women in sales.
Yep. Check it out. Check out womenyourmotherwarnsyouabout.com. And for more information about Susanna and I, you can also find us at salesgravy.com. We also both have courses at salesgravy.university. What a great way to up-level your sales skills. And it doesn't cost that much for you to do it. It's such a great investment for yourself. Go check that out, salesgravy.university. And check out uponconference.com to see us live streaming this show in September in Atlanta. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, especially for a female that you know in sales you want to share this with, please share this episode. We would appreciate it, and they would get something out of it. But Warners, we're out of here. See you on the next show.
Good night.